Welcome to the Surgeons in 3D Printing podcast. And today I have with me a very special guest with a completely different kind of, portfolio, I should say, a different area where we've not talked about yet. And I have with me Khalid Rafi. And Mr. Khalid is a senior leader of additive manufacturing programs development at ASTM International. He's responsible for various AM education and certification programs from ASTM with a vision to empower the AM community to support wider additive manufacturing adoption. Now, before joining ASTM, Mr. Rafi was a technical leader for additive manufacturing at Underwriter's Laboratory. He is having 20 years of industrial experience with over 10 years primarily focused on additive manufacturing. So Mr. Rafi has almost 30 journal articles with over 50 presentations at international conferences. So there's a lot of credibility. There is a lot of work which you've been doing. So welcome, Mr. Rafi. Welcome to the platform.
Thank you, Dr. Ruchi, for the nice introduction. And it's my pleasure to be here with you today and to discuss some thoughts on medical 3D printing and regulations and related standards.
Right. So before we take this conversation forward, I would like to ask you, how does a normal day go about for you? What is the kind of work that you're involved in?
Okay, so as you just explained that I'm responsible for the education and training activities at ASTM, particularly on the additive manufacturing side. So we have a lot of training programs which are currently under development as well as which are currently delivered at multiple times. So currently my focus is to make sure that these training programs are going well and these programs are planned and executed in the way it should be. And apart from the training activities, we are also getting into things like certification programs and things like that. So basically, it's a mix of developing and managing and executing training programs, as well as to assist the certification programs for the future. So some of the certification programs are currently under development, and we are going to release it soon.
Wow. So that's amazing. And I think that's one of the gaps that we really need to address. Coming to next, I would like to ask you that ASTM usually is responsible for creating these standards of care, standards of creating different products in the AM world. So I would like to first ask you, could you let our audience know, what is the difference between standards and regulatories?
Okay. So I would say both standards and regulations, they go hand in hand, because regulators come with the requirements based on standards. So when they set up a requirement, they need some basis, some background to take those requirements. So they fall back on standards to see how they can get those requirements in place. So I would say both standards as well as regulations both go hand in hand. It's more like the regulators, they come up with the requirements, and seeing the need, we create the standards.
Right. So with that being said, I would say that most of the interviews that I conducted with experts, with so many different people across the sector, I realized that everybody was finding the standards area, or the regulatory area rather, not the standards area, but the regulatory area as a gray zone. And so What is it about regulatory that I would specify it to surgeons who want to practice 3D printing that they should be careful about, because now regulatory is like huge. So I'll just boil it down to the medical 3D printing world. So what is it that one has to really see, that what should be the basic minimum standard, that basic minimum regulation that should be really taken care of?
Absolutely. So that's a great question. And I would say, I completely agree with you with regard to the gray zone when we talk about regulations. So coming to 3D printing, the regulations or the most important thing is that there is no specific regulations for additively manufactured parts. That's the first thing that we need to understand. All the additive manufactured parts are still regulated with the existing regulatory methods or methodologies that you apply for any medical device.
Right.
But we need some kind of additional requirements to be met when it comes to additive manufacturing. So all these regulations that you see, they are all written long back, or written when additive manufacturing was just evolving. And at that time, we were using additive manufacturing only for making non-safety critical things.
Exactly.
And people don't care much about regulation at that point, because you are not putting anything into your body that is made of 3D printing. But the way in which 3D printing has progressed in the past couple of years was massive. And many organizations started creating products which are going into human body. Then safety is a major issue.
Yes.
So 3D printing is exciting, and at the same time, it pops up some kind of risk as well. So we should be very much careful about those risk aspects. Mm-hmm. And the purpose of the regulation is to make sure that all these 3D printed components are safe for people to use. Okay. So having said that, what's the status of regulations in or applied to 3D printing at this point of time? So when I say regulations, again, I want to make it very clear that there are no specific regulations applied for 3D printing. They still use the existing regulations, but with some changes. And this also varies across different countries. For example, in the US, the way in which they see things is slightly different from the way in which people in the Europe or Australia see the regulations for 3D printing. I'll give an example. So in the US, most of these 3D printed components are still cleared using 510K pathway. They call it as 510K pathway, and that's the most common way of doing it. Okay, so whether it is a patient-specific device or it's a generic device, it's going through the 510K pathway.
510K, okay.
Okay. In the same way, if you go to Europe or if you go to Australia, they have a different way of checking additively manufactured parts. So they call it as they customized or custom devices. Mm-hmm. So that's a major difference. Custom device in the US, the definition for custom device in the US and the definition for custom device elsewhere in the world is slightly different.
Right.
So basically, custom device means it's a device that is specifically developed for a patient with a written prescription from a surgeon or from a medical practitioner.
Right.
And in US, if you are making such kind of a custom device, you can make only 5 per year.
Okay.
So, if you make the same thing more than 5, then it is not falling under the definition of custom device.
Right.
Whereas in the Europe and Australia and countries like that, they were using custom device as an exemption, which means whatever product that you print using 3D printing, they will put it under custom device exception, because custom devices are exempted from regulatory requirements, even though you have to follow some general or good manufacturing practices, but still it is exempted from the regulatory requirements. So until now, most of the manufacturers in the Europe, they were using that particular exemption, but now the regulators in Australia, in Europe, and they all realized that they should be tightened. So in the recent new European medical device regulation, this MDR, which just came for 2020, they have a different, or they changed the definition a little bit to make sure that they put enough tightening for the use of custom device exemption.
Yeah, I think they've also added it to be kind of prescribed by the doctor, isn't it?
Yes, no, even before it is prescribed by the doctor. And now, even though if it is prescribed by the doctor, but it is produced in a mass way, or it is produced in a mass production way, it's no more considered as a custom device.
Okay.
And there is another terminology that is called patient-specific device or patient-matched device. So often people confuse with these two things, custom device and patient-matched device.
Yeah.
Okay. So patient-matched devices are still under 510K in the US, which means it's still considered as a generic device when it comes to regulation.
Mm-hmm.
So there is no specific relaxation for patient-specific devices. And the fundamental difference between a custom device and a patient-matched device is that for a patient-matched device, the design or the design of your patient-matched device should fall in a particular design envelope.
Okay.
So if that component or if that part falls in a specific design envelope, then it is no more a custom device. So being a surgeon, you know that you make some changes in the geometry and things like that when you perform a surgery to make it adaptable for the patient. So that device cannot be considered as a custom device. Okay. If the same device, if it goes beyond the design envelope, for example, if you are doing an acetabular cup, okay, or a knee implant, if the knee implant is out of the design envelope for a normal patient, and then it is considered as a custom device. So, which means it is out of the normal design envelope. Okay?
Right.
So there's a subtle difference between these two things, but we should be careful about when you define a custom device as well as a patient-matched device.
Wow. So that was a complete disclosure of something really amazing for us, because these changes just happen, like, you don't know when do these happen. I think this change has just happened for 2000, I think in the 2020 MDR. So this was the recent change. Yeah.
Yes, and these definitions are based on this Global Harmonization Task Force.
Exactly.
GHTF, and all these regulators are most of these regulators are part of that Harmonization Task Force, and they came up with the definitions, and these definitions are now available online for anyone to read, and so you can make out the difference. What exactly is a custom device, and what exactly is a patient-matched device. Sometimes they call it patient-specific device. And previously, people even call it as customized device.
Yeah.
So a couple of years back, it was custom device and customized device. So now it is custom device and patient-matched device.
Yeah. And they seem to be very similar, but actually they are different in terms of the present-day definition.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. So that will be another learning. Going beyond, I would like you to tell us about different standards, and I am again kind of getting it narrowed down to the level of medical 3D printing. The standards that we use, because we have a committee which is different, and we have certain set of committees which are different for medical 3D printing. So could you just elaborate a little more and give a little introduction about the different standards? Obviously, we can't get very deep into that, but yes, a little bit of a
Yeah. So I can give you an overview about the current status of the standards particularly for 3D printing.
Mm-hmm.
And before that, people always ask, hey, why do we need this standard? Basically?
Exactly. Yes, I wanted to ask that as well. Yeah, because people have to know that why do you need standards? Yes.
Absolutely. So what standard do is it provides you a common procedure that everyone can follow. So which means when a manufacturer is manufacturing something, and the end user, so both the end user and the manufacturer can agree upon a common document that can be used by both the parties, so that there is no issues of any conflicts. So, or you can minimize the conflicts. So that's a general thing. So basically, standards are to use for both the manufacturer and for the end user, so that they can come up with a standardized product. Second thing is, these standards are developed by a group of experts, or they call it as consensus standards, which means it's not developed by one or two people. It is done by a lot of experts coming together, put their thoughts on it, went through multiple revisions, and make sure that this is solid thing which people can follow. So it's a credible document that people can follow and can be used for producing a product. Coming to medical, it is more important because we are working with human body. So when you make a product for human beings, people are a bit skeptical because the technology is new. There are no previous data to rely on. So the only thing that you can rely on is a standard or a document which has been developed by a group of experts. Okay. So that's a generic requirement when it comes to people or general public for the use of standards. But when you talk about manufacturers, for example, so when these device manufacturers, when they submit their product to a regulatory body, then they need to answer a lot of questions. They need to establish a lot of things like the safety, the efficacy, mechanical testing, how they performed all those things, what is the basis of doing all those things. So if they're not having a standard, for example, then they have to have their own internal procedures, and they have to convince the regulator that whatever things that we have done is good. For that, they need to do a lot of experiments and other documentations. But at the same time, if they say that, yeah, we did this mechanical testing as per this standard.
Yeah, it becomes easier to quote that.
Absolutely. So they save a lot of time and effort there.
Yeah.
So right. they need to again go with a new testing and documentation to say that what we did is right. From a regulator perspective, so we were talking about 3D printed components, and as I said, right now these 3D printed components are evaluated and and cleared by FDA. So if you see, even though we are talking about 3D printing for the past couple of years, the first approval of a 3D printed component came back in 2010. So it's almost 10 years now. FDA first approved a 3D printed implant. So during those time, there are only few components which are coming to FDA for evaluation. Past year, they did around 200 plus devices. In the past 10 years, they have 200 plus devices. That's also fine. They can manage. Think about the technology goes rapidly and come with thousands and thousands of submissions. Then it will be difficult for the regulators even to go through each and every document that they provided and to see whether they follow some procedures which are internally developed. So that takes a lot of time and effort for the regulators as well. So when you see the time and effort that need to spend by regulators, by manufacturers, it's always better to follow a standard. So standard makes your life easy.
I think it makes the life easy for both the parties, the regulators, as well as the people who have to manufacture, the manufacturers, and of course the end users. So it's like a very good situation in terms of the practices which are being followed, isn't it?
Absolutely. And moreover, at the end of the day, the general public is the one who is going to this product.
Exactly.
And we can instill confidence on them. If they see that, okay, this particular product is following certain quality standards set up by some international organizations, which means the product is good, I can safely use it. So that's more important. You have to instill confidence on people, particularly when we work with a new technology.
Yeah, and I think it's very, very important. But then going forward, I would see that there are also some of the gaps which are there in the standards with respect to medical 3D printing. So can you address a few gaps?
Yes, absolutely. So not just for medical, even for other industry sectors, there are a lot of gaps. But when it comes to medical, specifically, we can talk about certain things because medical industry embraced this technology just because of some unique characteristics of 3D printing.
Exactly.
One of that is lattice structures, the capability to make complex features, lattice structures, which mimic our bone, right?
Yes.
And when you create such kind of a lattice structure, one important thing is that the cleanliness of your final part. So you don't know how much powders are still remained in the part.
Yes.
So we need a standard to say what should be the limit, what should be the minimum allowable percentage of powder that can be allowed, or if not, what's the condition. So we need some kind of a requirement stating what should be the percentage of remaining material that is allowed. Similarly, testing of the lattice features. So far, we were having mechanical testing for flat specimens, flat coupons. But when it comes to lattice, we don't have enough.
It's very complex. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. So these are some of the things people are now working on, or standard committees are now working on. Similarly, the use of powders, reuse of powders, because we use powders for additive manufacturing, particularly for metal additive manufacturing. We use metallic powders, right? So the problem I would say, one of the economic aspect of additive manufacturing is that you can reuse these powders because titanium it's costly. We know that.
Yeah, exactly.
So if you can reuse the powder, that makes things economical. But the problem is when you reuse the powder, there is a high potential for it to get contaminated.
Right. So how long and for how exactly?
How many times? How many times you can do that, and how long you can do that? What kind of precautions that you should follow? How many test methods? How many tests that you should do while the powder is under processing? So all those things need to be addressed. So another important standard gap that we need to address is that how many times, or is there any mechanism to control the reuse of the powder, or if there is any schema or a strategy to control the reuse of the powder. So this is some of the key standards I think people are expecting to come out from these standard organizations, and in fact we are working on those standards as well.
Yeah, and these are amazing things because lattice structures are really helpful in terms of the complexities that they actually cover. But again, the thing is that obviously we need to know what is the powder. Will it not be toxic to will we be able to really clean that to that extent? And those things are so important, and especially with metallic powders if they are entrapped inside. So that's so important. And would you also like to reveal to us the status of standards which support medical 3D printing? Because these are some of the gaps, which I would say we've come a long way. So, but we need to acknowledge what we've done up until now. So what are those standards in supporting medical 3D printing?
Yeah, so I can tell you what's happening in ASTM and ISO.
Yes, please.
So for additive manufacturing specifically, so we have the standard development process going on in a collaboration between ISO and ASTM. And we have a specific committee called ASTM, a subcommittee under ASTM F42. So ASTM F42 is the committee which deals with standard development for additive manufacturing.
Yeah, I'm a part of that committee. That's really active. Yeah, I'm a part of that committee.
Yeah. So under ASTM F42, we have again a subcommittee called ASTM F4207, which deals with applications for multiple industry sectors, and medical is one of their industry sector.
Yeah.
So we call it as a subsection F420703. So, and that's a committee which works on standards specifically for additive manufacturing. So at this point, we are working on a couple of standards, and one of the standards is basically to determine, as I said, a strategy for powder recycling. So what are the different schemas that one should follow when it comes to powder recycling? That's one work item that's currently going on. And there are also standards in development which talks about material properties of titanium, specifically for medical device applications. So previously we have this material standard that was a generic one, but now there's a standard which we are working towards specific properties for medical device applications. And apart from these kind of specific standards, we have a lot of other standards which is published under design, materials, post-processes and things like that. So those standards can also be applied for 3D printing of medical devices.
Yeah.
For example, we have a standard called ISO 52904, which talks specifically about the control methods that you should follow when you print critical parts for critical applications, which includes medical devices as well. Similarly, we have a standard called 52900, which talks about terminology, like when you communicate among yourself, you should use a common language. So this particular standard tells you the terminologies that we normally use in additive manufacturing. So we have generic standards which can be applied for 3D printing of medical devices directly. And we also have standards under development which are specific to 3D printing of medical devices. And in addition to ASTM, I know there are other organizations like IEEE, DICOM. They're also developing standards on their domains.
Right.
On their domain, specifically on the medical imaging part of it.
Yeah.
So standard development is quite, I would say it's quite, fast now. It's not like the earlier days that it take 3 years or 4 years.
Yeah.
We have a mechanism to accelerate the standards by performing some research internally, and that will support the development of standards within ASTM and ISO.
Yeah. And I think we need standards, because that is how we actually progress and shorten the time to actually create the next product, because it doesn't end here. There is a next thing which is coming in. And if we have the standards in place, obviously we can go to the next step sooner. So definitely that's of value. But then there are many people who feel that, is there really a need to have a regulated 3D printing device? Do we really need to have that regulated? Many people think about it like that. Because, 3D printing is like kind of easy in terms of, getting the product done, prototyping and stuff like that. And then you feel, why do I need to get it, why do I have to get that regulated? So just a little talk about that.
So when it comes to, first of all, we should think why we need regulation. So the ultimate purpose of regulation is to make sure that the products that are available in the market is safe to use. So that's the main purpose of the regulation. And when it comes to 3D printing, since it's an emerging technology, it's an advancing technology, people feel that once you have regulations in place, it will spur innovation. I would say there are two sides of the coin. One is, when you say it's spur the innovation, you can also say that when you have some requirements, you will have some more innovative thoughts to circumvent that requirements and make sure that you comply with the requirements.
Right.
Okay. So regulations are necessary just to make sure that whatever products that we are bringing out through 3D printing is safe to use. That is necessary for the industry as well. So, for example, if you should use components using 3D printing, and if there are no regulations, or if there is no check and balance on what you're doing, and on a fine day, if something happens, then it affects the entire industry.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
at the end of the day, we are dealing with human beings. I mean, if we are talking of medical 3D printing, at the end of the day, it is we who are to be suffering. So it might be any one of us, because anybody could be a patient, right?
Yeah. So we cannot compromise the safety of people. And for that, we need regulations in place. And whatever we need to comply with the regulations, I think it's our responsibility to make sure that we comply with the regulations so that people will be safe and people will be confident to use the 3D printed products. And as a whole, it will be beneficial for the industry. So once people started using 3D printed components, the industry is going to grow.
Yeah, that's very true. So if somebody wanted to kind of get into the standardization process and stuff like that, how can one do that?
Okay, so again, another interesting question, and even though if you didn't ask, I would say
yes.
about this, because most of the people feel that getting into this standardization process is a huge task, but it's pretty straightforward. Being a member of ASTM or getting a member of ASTM is really straightforward. You can just come to our website and register for an individual membership. So we have two kinds of membership. One is called individual membership and another one is institutional membership. So being an individual member, you are open to all the activities, all the standardization activities that is happening within the ASTM. So it's now up to you what you want to do there, how you want to contribute there. It's not just about developing the standards. So once you are there, it gives you the opportunity to interact with other experts, learn from other experts, share your knowledge as well. And you are close to what's going to happen in the next 2 years, because you know what's happening in the standard development and you know what's going to come out in the next 2 years, which means you are pretty close to the actual technology development and you are interacting with so many experts. Okay, so I would encourage everyone, if possible, if you have time and if you have the wish to volunteer, then this is a good opportunity for you to be a part of the standard development activity. And there are no other hurdles. There is no other, technical or official hurdles in getting involved. So once you get involved, you will know where you want to pitch in.
Very true. And I also feel, that you feel a part of a community which is doing something together. And that feeling that your knowledge in terms, because anything that you develop, different people have different ways of imparting their expertise.
Yeah.
So it's an amazing place to be, definitely.
And for students, most of the people don't know about that. For students, getting a membership in ASTM is absolutely free. So basically to encourage them to be a part of these activities and to know what's happening in terms of the standard development in supporting the industry. So as I said before, being a member in ASTM is pretty straightforward, and it won't take any time or multiple steps to be a member.
Amazing. So I think people should actually look into the website, go there. At least if you're a student, I mean, it's definitely straightforward. And if you're an expert, then actually you're needed there.
Yeah.
Right. So please go. Well, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you. And that was quite a lot of learning in a short span of time. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ruchi, for giving me this opportunity, and hope we can have something similar sometime later as well.
Yes, of course. Yeah. Thank you. See you then. See you later. Yeah. Bye-bye.